How to prove your source of funds with an EB-5 application. That's kind of the major question I think that Shakespeare wrote about years ago in Hamlet, to be or not to be. And I think it's a similar philosophical challenge for EB-5. To prove your funds or not to prove the funds, that is the question. With our more than 15 years of experience with EB-5, we've seen hundreds of cases and successfully dealt with the vast majority of them to help our clients navigate this process of proving the source of funds, what documents you have to provide in order to successfully pass through the entire process. So what exactly is required depends in large part on what source of funds that you're using. Probably the easiest source of funds that you could use is a salary, right? Because you're not investing any capital, you're not selling any assets that you have, such as a home or real estate. You earned funds, you earned money just for your labor, and so it's relatively straightforward to prove that. Now, again, depending on individual certain circumstances, it's not always that difficult proving the source of funds, or in many cases, it's easy to prove the source. Hey, I worked for this guy for 20 years. In the sweat of my brow, I gave him the best years of my life, and 20 years you put in at the company. That's all fine and good, and we can prove that. Where the challenges sometimes might arise is with the path of the funds, because the path of the funds is just as important as the source. The source, we can show, hey, I worked for this company, here's what I earned, here are my tax returns. That's great, but then we have to show the path. Okay, where's the bank account that you received your salary to? Show us the bank account where you accumulated your funds and eventually accumulated $800,000 and then wired that to the project. With the path of funds, that sometimes can create some challenges, but that's a whole nother story we can discuss in another video. Today, we're gonna focus on the source of the funds. And again, like I said, it can be any number of a combination of different sources. You're not limited to just one. And there are different challenges with each type of source of funds. So I mentioned salary as being one of the rather easy options. Probably one of the more challenging ones, and it's a very common source of funds, is business earnings, or maybe the sale of real estate. Sale of real estate or business earnings or dividends by themselves are not necessarily challenging, but where the problem often comes up is where if the real estate had been acquired many years ago, 10, 20, 30 years, or the business had been opened 10, 20, 30 years ago, and the client invested a large amount of money into the business at the time of its formation, or made a large down payment on purchasing the real estate, or maybe paid for it in cash, the challenge is we've got to show where the client earned those funds 10, 20, 30 years ago to buy the real estate or to open the business. Other very common sources of funds include gift arrangements, and you can have your spouse gift you the money, you can have your parents gift you the money, you can even have a good friend gift you the money. Now, if you're getting outside your family, gifting funds can get a little bit tenuous, and you want to be careful of that. Meaning, if you've got a friend from work and he gifts you $800,000, the government's probably going to have questions. What kind of friendship did you have where you had a friend who was willing to give you $800,000, no strings attached? I'd like a friend like that. So when you're dealing with non-relatives, we generally recommend to structure it as a loan arrangement. And that shows that there's some commercial interest in it, and that gives some explanation as to why a friend or other third party or even a friend's company would loan you the money. They get some interest rate, they get the money back at some point, you pay them back, everybody's happy. So that's generally the preferable route to go when you're not dealing with gift arrangements between relatives. Now, I mentioned a loan with your friend. It could be a loan from your friend personally. It could be a loan from your friend's business. And it also could be a loan from your own business. And another option that's actually preferable from a source of funds perspective, and it's becoming increasingly common, is a loan from a financial institution. So the law is a little bit vague as to what constitutes a financial institution, and I might even be using the word incorrectly. I don't think they use the phrase even financial institution. It's something along those lines. But the point is, if you got a loan from a bank, it's pretty straightforward in that the government's not going to require you to tell the bank to show how did we source the funds? Where did we get this money from? Where did we, the bank, get $800,000? We might have tens, hundreds of millions, if not billions, under assets under control. Why would we have to show where this 800,000 comes from? So that makes things very easy for you, the EB-5 investor. You don't have to collect that data, paperwork, tax returns and everything. If it came from a financial institution, more or less, that's sufficient for USCIS, and we don't have to provide all this details about source of funds and path of funds. And one other alternative that has become increasingly popular is certain regional centers are now providing financing to their investors. As little as maybe 6% per annum, they are providing loans to the investors somewhere in the range of about $300,000. So if you're able to provide and source $500,000, you can finance the remaining $300,000. And again, that creates, eases up some pressure on your cash flow, for example, if you don't have all those funds readily available. And secondly, the advantage of using that structure is you're not obligated, similar to a bank scenario, you're not obligated to provide the source of funds where this regional center got its funds. Please reach out to us with any questions you might have so that we can give you individualized attention as to your particular matter and how we can assist you going forward.